Okay. Right. And the X-ray that see through things, your health checks. You always use X-ray for your lungs and intestinal check. And in archaeology, you may be able to use for various objects. And this is one example. These are glass beads, perforated beads, parts of the necklace. Belongs to the Yayoi period in the tomb of the Yayoi, not mounded tomb, but in the Yayoi period, they made a little larger tomb than normal for the power kings and local powers. And sometimes they would include some material, buried grave goods like these. And glass beads were kind of popular at the time for among the kings and leaders. And this is a very primitive form of glass material. And as you see them through X-ray, you would see something like this. And you see the round things, tiny round black things, shadows. These are bubbles, air bubbles inside. You can't really see it from the outside, right? And oops, sorry, I'm sorry. I hate this Apple mouse. If you touch it, it moves around so rapidly. Anyway, how they made these glass beads, there are several ways of producing these beads at the time. One is to make mold by a clay, and in a tiny cavity you put the molten glass and form beads. That's one way. The other way is to extend a tube, a glass tube. When it's hot and soft, you pull it so it extends and becomes long. And after cooling it off, you cut the pipe into small beads and polish them into shape. And these are the major ways of producing beads glass beads at the time. But you wouldn't be able to tell which method was taken from looking at it from outside. If you see through with X-ray, you will see the bubble round. That means these were not extended. If you extend the glass tube, the bubble inside would be also extended. So you would see a long, elongated bubble. So these were obviously made in a mold technique, something like that. Yeah, you can use so much X-rays for various purposes, to see anything inside the material. In a historic period, you use a lot in investigating Buddhist images. Sometimes you have cavities opening inside the images. And in many cases, you would find some material inside the opening, like the sutras and okyoが入っていたりね、するんで。So X-rays are so much used in archaeology and history too. And microscopic observation, of course, you use it so much. And yeah, I think I mentioned it in soil analysis too. And like pottery tempera, you would try to find where this pottery was made, either whether it was made locally or it was made in other area and brought in to the site area. And you can't really see that until you break the piece and see the content of the clay. Because when you make a pottery, you have to mix other material like sand. Otherwise, if you don't mix anything and pure clay, use pure clay, you will not be able to make a pottery. It would break because when you form a pottery with clay, it's soft because it contains a lot of water. But before baking it, you have to dry it. Otherwise, it's going to explode. And you dry it completely. And because the water goes out, the volume shrinks a little bit. And in the process of baking afterwards, also the clay shrinks. And as a whole, the entire volume would shrink like over 10%, or sometimes close to 20%. So if you don't have anything else inside the clay, then clay would not be able to hold itself while it's shrinking. So it breaks. You can't make anything. So in order to prevent that, you have to mix sand or other material. Sand is a minute particle of stones, right? Stone would not shrink by drying or baking. So it would hold the clay to break, you know. So you have to mix something like that, the minerals too. And Jomon people, of course, knew about it, and they mixed so much volume of sand into the clay when they made the pottery. And it's very difficult to distinguish the clay itself and tell the locality of the clay because they are almost the same. But if you talk about the sand, the assemblage of the sand made of various type of mineral, various type of stones, differs, depends on the location, you know. So if you find the sands from the temper, I mean, temper is a body of the pottery, and if the assemblage of the sand is similar to the local sands that you can acquire from that area, then it's locally made. You would be able to tell. But if they're different, you know, the pottery must have been brought in like that. So that's one of the most popular way of using microscopic observation too. And there are so many others, you know. Nowadays, some of the stone tool archaeologists would use microscope to observe the surface of the blade of the bladed stone tool. And they are trying to find out the use marks of the tool. And there are always, you will always find scars, minute, tiny scars, 傷がね、あって。And the pattern of the scars would be able to tell what kind of object he was cutting. It was either a hard material, bones, or a softer material like wood, or even softer leather or meat. You know, the scar patterns are different, they would say. So that's another way of using microscopic study on stone tools. Okay. Anyway, so on and so forth. The scientific analysis is very, very important in today's archaeological study. And another thing is the physical anthropology. This is a different field. Well, there archaeology is included in anthropology in the Western world, but this is different things. Of course, it's a skeletal study, human body study. And by comparing the skeletal remains, you would be able to tell about the evolution, race differences, life length of the dead, and nutrition states and food. Even now, they got so much advance in this kind of scientific analysis of the something called strontium. Strontium-90 is included in the body, especially in the teeth or bones. And they always use the teeth. It's easier for them to detect those strontium. And by measuring the patterns of the strontium, you will be able to, what kind of food this dead body was lived on. So whether he was a meat eater or a plant eater or fish eater, you will be able to detect that. You will be able to tell that by this analysis. This is latest modern analysis. And also, by looking at the bones, you will have knowledge about the history of his injury of the dead, or a disease remains will be seen on bones. This is one example of a skeletal remain in Edo period in Japan. It's not too far away. It's about 200 years from now. And this is in Tokyo. This is a site I excavated. And in downtown Tokyo, very close to Kanda Station, Kanda Eki. And it's just packed with buildings and streets and all the concretes all over now. But used to be a temple, a lot of temple there. And beside the temple, there was a graveyard, cemetery. And so if you are going there to excavate the site, you will find a lot of these, piles and piles of these. And you find this wooden coffin, round wooden coffin, like barrel. It was very popular at the time. And you don't have too much space for them to bury the dead body extended, because the land is limited in that area, Edo area, Tokyo area, so narrow. So this barrel type of coffin was very popular. So the body was flexed like this, bent ですね。屈葬と言いますけどね。And the bones are all in shape, of course, within 200 years, and it was all buried too. And the soil, not all the soil came in, so all the flesh are gone, but the bones are still in shape. Sometimes you may be able to find brain inside the skull. Skull is very hard and protects the brain. So if you're lucky, or may not be lucky, but you may find a brain inside. And sometimes you will find grave goods buried with them. And not very many found from normal people's grave, but always even for normal people grave in Edo period, you always find coins, 6 pieces of coins always, because it was a fee for crossing over the river to the another world. ね、六門線って言ってね、渡し地ですね。サンズの川って言うんです。サンズ River ですね。サンズ River lies between this world and another world, dead world. And you have to go across the water, the river, and you have to ride the boat, and you have to pay the fee for that. So you will bury 6 coins inside with the body. And sometimes you will have, なんていうのかね、beads。なんていうんだっけな。数珠って英語でなんていうんだ。誰か知ってる？ The Buddhist goods that you would hang on your wrist or even sometimes neck too, but it's not a necklace. It's a sheer religious material. And you may find those beads too, wooden, very simple, primitive beads sometimes. But anyway, and by looking at those bones, you would be able to so many things. And these are the samples of the male and female bones. And can you tell the difference between male and female? Anybody? No?
I think the female pelvic bone is a lot larger.
Larger?
The female one is a lot larger. The pelvic bone specifically.
Oh, pelvis. Oh, yes. Pelvis bones, obviously large in the female than male. The male don't need a big pelvis, but the female needs it to protect the babies, right? So they always have a big hip. But in general, the bones are larger and thicker in the case of male, right, compared to the female. And that's taken for granted, except for pelvis. And how about the head, skull? What's the difference? There's an obvious difference between male and female. It's kind of hard to tell, maybe. It's right there, right here, right above your nose, right above your eyes. This spot, right above your eyes. The male, in the case of male, this part is sticking out. You see, can you see that this is sticking out? The female, slender, nothing sticking out. That's the major difference between the male and female skull. Or you can touch your skull, you know, over your eyes, like where the eyebrow is. You know, the male, all the male has a sticking out form, but the female is slender and smooth. And another part behind the skull is a tiny piece sticking out for male and not for female, but the major difference is above your nose. And as soon as you see this part, you will be able to tell whether it's a male or female. Anyway, okay, and so this is fracture femur. Obviously, it's been broken right here. Must be a big accident that he got. And but it was not just broken at all, but it's being cured. It's been, well, it's not in the right kind of shape. It's not straight. It's crooked, but it's being cured. You can see. So that means that by this accident, big accident, this guy didn't die. He was still living, survived. And that's why it's been cured. You see, you can tell those facts from bones too. In this case, cranial fracture. You see a big crack right here, all the way down from the eye cavity to. So it's been a big, probably he got into fight. He was from the warfare, and he got hit right here with the axe or something like that. So probably he died because there's no sign of being cured along the crack. So he died for it. And this is a very strange case. This is a Southern American example of Incan culture. And they did the brain operation you know, for curing disease or something like that, or mental disease. For mental disease, they did operate the head, open the head, and did the operation to the brain. And this case, obviously, this guy didn't survive. You know, the cross section would not show any cure, so he immediately died when they messed around with his brain. Sorry about that, but in some cases you would see a very minute sign of curement along the scar. So some guys would have survived for some certain time, I guess. It's kind of spooky.
I think I remember that the Inca did the operation because of like inflamed brain. Mm-hmm. Like the brain would be too big for the skull, so they have to remove it a little bit. That's why they make the little holes.
Really? Too big? What do you mean by too
it's
big?
Like, you know, when inflammation, it's like there's too much blood. It's like expanding because of injury. So they have to remove a little bit because it's putting pressure on the head. And they get like very bad headache.
Okay. But how could they tell that?
I'm not sure how they figured out that removing is the solution, but it seems a bit extreme.
Yeah, well, we don't not really know about their principle. They nobody can answer that, but they don't have the record. But they did have this belief that they have to open up the skull and do something to the brain in order to cure some types of disease or illness. So anyway, this is a very peculiar case. Not very many races who did that. But anyway, this is one example of activities related to human bones, you know. And also, well, thank you very much. Okay. And Middle German period, you wouldn't see so much skeletal remains. They're organic material, so as soon as they were buried underground, they would disappear in a short time. But this is a rare case. These bones, these bodies were buried underground. It's not waterlogged site, maybe a little bit wet, but not waterlogged, nor either they're in the shell mound. The shell mound would prevent the organic material, especially bones, to decay out, because the shell would give a lot of calcium diluted by rain and make coating on the surface of the bones. So they would preserve a lot of bones and stuffs. But this site does not see any shell or anything. It's buried directly into the ground. But it was survived. It survived all right. And peculiarly enough, this is a Shinjuku ward, very close to Shinjuku Station. And you see this is called extend burial. And when you bend the body and make it smaller to save the land or save the energy of digging the grave hole, grave pit, then you would call it flex burial. 屈葬と伸展葬ですね。屈葬は曲げた方です。Bent one is flex. And this is extend burial. And one of the interesting things that they did to one of those skull is the reconstruction of the head, the face. One of those guys were reconstructed as this. Now they have this technology from the delinquency investigation, of course. 犯罪捜査ねから、被害者の顔を復元するっていう技術がねあるんですね。The same kind of technology normally used by police is now used for archaeology too. They could reproduce this face of the Jomongai. You know, it's really interesting too. Gives you a lot of image reality. You know. So the physical anthropology would help you and give you a lot of information as long as you have the skeletal remains, right? And other field of study closely related to archaeology would be cultural anthropology or ethnology. I think I told you about that. Because the cultural anthropology handles the present living human only, not the dead ones, not the past, but the present only. And they would give you a lot of hints when you have to explain about the, for example, artifacts of the prehistoric time. And if some races or some tribes still use the same kind of artifacts, still use the same kind of stone tools and potteries and things like that, then you would be able to tell how they were made and how they were used. You see, because you're just observing the living human, you can record all kinds of elements related to that artifact. And as I mentioned, it's not 100% proof to adapt that data to the prehistory, but it gives you a lot of hints too. You know, so cultural anthropology is very, very important for archaeologists. And now we have a new field called ethnoarchaeology. Ethnoarchaeology. It's a combination of ethnology and archaeology, right? And especially when you are dealing with invisible things or sounds that disappear or too soon, then you would try to collect the data from anthropology, ethnology. All right. Even the amusements, games, playing games, you know, they must have had a lot of various type of amusing games, but none of these can be deciphered. Even though we may find some material that could have been used for the, you know, playing purposes, but we can't really find out how they were used, you know. But by using a lot of data accumulated from cultural anthropology, you may adapt some of the data because they have a similar, specific kind of game playing with the same kind of material that we find from prehistoric sites. So that's a possibility, remains in possibility, but gives you a good hint. And history and art history, I think I explained that too. History handles only literature, and archaeology only handles material. They can always cooperate and find out more facts in history. You know, they could all prove something in part. And art history also, or represents art represents the spiritual culture. It's formed in material, but show a lot of spiritual aspects of the human beings. So that gives also a lot of hints to archaeology, even though they're a pretty subjective field of study. But they're trying to express it in objective manner, though. Anyway, we need a lot of help from other fields because we are dealing with human beings, which consists of uncountable elements, you see. Anyway, so archaeology is a human study through material culture and pretty objective. And in the method-wise, it's scientific, so it's pretty objective and verifiable, very handles reality. and can prove so many things from the evidences. All right, so much about the methods, and I would like to go into the next step, which is the history of Japan. And from this on, I would explain about the prehistoric time period and its culture and cultural transition, how the culture changed and how environmental change was related to it, and how people try to adapt to the change of the environment. That will be the main theme of this class. And I would not handle all the history of Japan, but especially the prehistoric time represented by Paleolithic, Cusic, and Jomon period, and Yayoi period, which had a pretty outstanding change of the environment, and very easy to see the change and transition of the culture. So, just a minute. Let's change the slides. Wait. Just a minute. Okay, can't see anything here. Wait a minute. All right. Okay, all right. Okay, can you see this formation of Japanese archipelago? All right. Okay, let me start the Paleolithic environment and life. What's the difference between Paleolithic and Neolithic? There are terms Paleo and Neolithic. Lithic is stone. Paleo is old and Neo is new. Old Stone Age and New Stone Age, literally. So in Japanese too, Kyuseki and Shinseki to imasu. The difference between these, in terms of culture, there are big differences because the substance are different and the technology are different and stuff like that. And material culture are different. But basically, the term difference is the technology of stone tool making. I think I've shown you in the last class some of the chipped stone tool, chipped stone axe. Okay, this is chipped stone axe, right? It's made by chipping the stone and forming it by chipping technology. And this is a polished stone tool, right? It's being formed roughly by chipping, but in the final stage, you polish it on the wet stone, toishine, wet stone, and polish it and smooth it and make the blade and entire shape. And this is a difference between Paleo and Neo technology. In the Neolithic period, they're still stone tool user, and they also use the chipped stone tools, but they added polished technology. That means Neolithic. This is a Paleo technology, okay? That's the difference. But as a result, they would have different ways of living, because into the Neolithic, they started agriculture. They were not hunter and gatherer anymore. They started agriculture, no course. And also they stopped wandering around. They settled down. They made houses, they made villages, and stayed in one place almost, compared to the Paleolithic people who were chasing around the animal. That's a big difference. The sedentary system ですね。定住と言いますね。And the Neolithic period, they started to use pottery. They never had pottery in the Paleolithic time. They invented pottery, and that changed a lot of their lives. And also domestication of animal is another definition of the Neolithic. They grew animal. So it's a big difference. And that's the definition of Western area, like Europe and America and other parts. Probably in the Asia too, like China and other area. But Japan is very strange in that manner, because we have Paleolithic culture, Paleolithic lives, but we don't have this Neolithic culture, especially the agriculture, until very late. For thousands of years, when everybody else in the world adopted agriculture, Japan still remained in hunter and gatherer culture. And so we would not be able to call Jomon culture as Neolithic culture. We can't call it Neolithic. It's not. Well, they started to use a polished stone tool, of course, and they had pottery, of course, and they settled down. They were sedentary people, of course, but they never had this agriculture. It's very strange. I will explain about that later, pretty much later. But so it's different. Jomon culture is not Neolithic culture. And as to the Paleolithic culture, it's pretty difficult to study about it, because the absolute number of the sites are a lot less than later period, because population was so small and time was so large compared to the later period. And so you don't have much material to study about. You don't find too much artifacts, and you don't find any organic material in Japan. Other parts of the world, like Siberia and some parts of Europe, they found several organic evidences from that period, but not in Japan. Everything is decayed and disappeared in the loam layers. Loam layer is acidic. It's so easy for organic material to decay out. So it's pretty difficult to study about this Japanese Paleolithic period. Okay. All right, and then I will explain about the history of Japan. Where is it? Okay. Formation of Japanese archipelago. Well, as you can see, it's a long time ago. It was a part of continent, Asian continent. But you see, Earth is constantly moving, not the rotating only, but the inside, the magma is rotating, flowing around, moving around inside, and sometimes it comes out towards the surface, and that pushes the plate that's the base of the ocean and the land. It's a plate. The area called plate, very hard mineral area. And that, the magma pushes around all the plates and moves around and gives a lot of pressure to the continent or lands or islands. And so the continent or lands are always being affected by this movement. Like the highest peak of the earth is Everest, Mount Everest. Closer to the peak of the Everest, you can find the fossilized shells. That means the peak of the Everest used to be the bottom of the ocean. You know, it's been pushed and pushed from the south. So it was raised so high and became the highest peak now. And so on, you know, everywhere is moving around. And so was Japan too. It used to be the part of, edge of the Asian continent. But because of this push and pull, some parts were separated from the continent, coastal area, and became a cluster of islands. This gray part represents the present Japanese islands and its original location. So it was straight if it was the same islands. But you see small islands, the clusters of small islands were the original first form of Japan. And later on, at the same time, the plate pushes from the Pacific towards Japan. And that's why we have a lot of earthquake and tidal wave and volcanic activities. The plate goes beneath the Japanese archipelago and rubs the bottom of it. So a lot of resistance gives very radical movements like earthquake and volcanic activities. And so they were forming, this is the Japan Sea now, but it used to be like a lake here. All these were lands, you know, all linked together around 500,000 years ago. And until China, you know, it was land. So all the animal at the time just walked around and walked into Japanese archipelago. And pre-inhabitants they were before human beings came in, you see. And at the same time, there's another geological pressure from the continent too. And that's why the straight islands became bent like this, you know, pressure from both sides. So a lot of parts of Japanese coastal area today, even today, goes up and down. You know, some parts in Chiba Prefecture sinks by being pulled into the inside of the earth by plates. Anyway, so, and by 38,000 years ago, first human groups came into this archipelago. And by 20,000, you see most of the present shape of Japan, but land was bigger. This is the coastal line, you know. And there's no ocean between Shikoku and Honshu, main island, Shikoku Island, Kyushu Island. There's a water now, but it was all connected. It was all dried. And except for these straits between Hokkaido and Honshu, the Tsugaru Straits were still remaining. They didn't connect, the land didn't connect because the ocean was deep. And this Tsushima Straits also has the same depth as Tsugaru. So it was, you still have narrow straits of water. But entire Japan was almost, you know, one block of land, island, you see. And so by the time the human beings came into Japan, Japan was in the same geological feature or form. But the ocean was lower because at that time was glacier period. The glacier period, 氷期ですね、氷河期時代, comes around every like 100,000 years, every 100,000 years, and become cold and warms up again, and you know, that keeps going. And so we're now heading for another glacier period now. Probably in several tens of thousands of years, we will face another cold era. And let's see. And Japanese archipelago, as I explained about the plate technology and plate tectonics, we call plate movement towards the Japan, and gives so much influence, including volcanic activities. Volcanoes are so active in Japan. We hear, even today, we hear a lot of news about the minor scale eruption and earthquake and stuff. You know, now it's so active right here in the southern Kyushu and those islands area. They're feeling earthquake every day these days. You can read that in the news. And so as the in the past, they had so much volcanic events, eruption events all over Japan. Even today, we have, we can count like 110 or 11 active volcanoes throughout Japan. You know, it's a volcanic country. And that's also why we have the hot springs, which is good for us, but, you know, and let me see. And they had so much accumulation of volcanic ash, as you saw in today's lecture. The lobe accumulation is immense, meters and meters of accumulation of the ash. And what changes by the change of temperature is the sea level. It's a earth-wide phenomenon. Because when the entire Earth is cold, then you see all the snowfall, especially in the Arctic area, polar area, very cold area, and high altitude area, way up in the mountains, very cold, was even colder. So all the rainfall, snowfall would not melt, just keep accumulating to form a glacier. That's glacier. It's a huge stack of ice. And the entire volume of the water on the earth is about the same all throughout the history. So when in the cold climate, much portion of the water is fixed as ice in that environment. So the volume of the ocean, the water, decreases, and eventually the water, ocean level, surface level goes down. See, and this is the diagram that shows it. And the lower graph shows the change of temperature, and you know. And these were found out from the accumulation of a huge stack of ice in the Greenland. And they include the original air in the ice, you know, bubbles. The early period air is packed in the ice, and they extract the air of each layer of the ice and would define the temperature of the time. So they have a very minute, accurate graph of ups and downs of the temperature. And this upper one shows the sea level up till what? This is present. This is about 40,000 years ago when the human beings came into Japan. And the ocean level just went down and down and down. And suddenly goes up very rapidly and warm up. And that means, you see, this collaborates with this graph, this upslope, entire upslope is a warming up of the climate. And you can see this matches, the water level matches with that. And also this area too, going down, the ocean level going down as the temperature went down like this. Okay. And 500,000 to 600,000 years before present, the land looked like that. You see the entire Japan is, whoops. Oh, wait a minute. Oh, I hate this. I'm sorry. Siberia, present Siberia, Korean Peninsula in China. This is the present coast. And the entire area around Japan was all connected or landed because the lowering of the ocean. And Japan Sea was just a huge lake. And so in this time period, when human beings did not appear into Japanese archipelago yet, but animals from continent just walked through and went into Japanese archipelago. And here's an animal that came from the continent. And from northern area, the elephants, various elephant types, huge ones, adapted to the colder climate with a lot of hair growing, like mammoth came from the north into Hokkaido, northern island. And also Nauman's elephant would come into from north and probably from the south too. And they walked around the main island and other parts of the Japan. And Otsunoshika, it's a huge horned deers. And other animal, big ones and some small ones too. Regular sized boar or deers were also present in Okinawa too. And since the Paleolithic people lived around the coastal area of the Asia, were hunter and gatherers, as I mentioned, and they were following those animals as games. And so they had to move around because those mammals were grass-eating mammals, and they could not stay in one place. They are always moving around in herds. So eventually, human beings also has to walk around and chase around those animals to survive. And in the glacial period, cold climate, you would not be able to find a lot of plant food resources. There's not much to eat in the cold climate. There are only conifers, shinyoju, conifers would not bear much fruit or nuts. And otherwise, all the grasslands, and maybe you will find some kinds of berries a little bit, some kinds of nuts a tiny bit, pine nuts or hazelnuts and things like that, but not in quantity, not enough to survive. So they were mainly dependent upon this animal meat, animal flesh, and animal blood, probably. And so they could not stay in one place. They were wandering around, and naturally, they would come into Japan as a result of chasing those animals. And how and when they came into Japan, we do not know yet. The time period, we are finding a lot of evidences like stone tools from various layers. And the lowest layer, the earliest phase of the stone tools we are finding were from 38,000 years before present. That's the oldest evidences. Probably we have not found the earlier ones. Probably we may find something like 40,000 years old tools, but we haven't found those yet. But from all over Japan, almost all over Japan, we are finding 38,000 years old stone tools. So that's pretty sure. That's the time they came in and spread all through the island. And how and where they came in. Well, not this is not the right kind of map. I should show you back to this one. This is close to when they came in. And China was not connected to Japan at all. And you see still have straits into area. And so human beings could walk down to Hokkaido. This part, you can't see it, but this part was all connected. This was all landed. So you could walk down to Hokkaido, but you have to go across the straits, go across the ocean here or here into the main island. So they are now talking about the crafts or boats, dugout canoe, stuff like that, or even rafts. イカダね、カヌーとかイカダとか丸木舟とか、existence, but we haven't found any of the evidence of those ocean crossing devices. And they've been doing the experiments. The Science Museum of Japan had done these experiments for several years to cross the ocean from Taiwan to Okinawa, with a dugout canoe, but they're not successful. They succeed last year or the one before, but there's a lot of fake stories about the behind stories, and they did not do the right thing, so it's not a very good story. But so the experiments are not very valuable, very credible. Anyway, so is there other ways of coming into Japan, going across the straits? There's another thought that I have is that they would not go across the straits. So tens of kilometers away, still it looks very narrow, but still it's a wide ocean to cross over. But it was in the glacier period, very cold time. And they still had seasons, of course, summer and winter. They may not had autumn and spring, but a clear difference of summer and winter in the temperature, of course, in the glacier period too. In winter time, especially, this northern area is pretty cold, and the ocean may freeze, only on the surface, and it gives a ice on the surface strong enough to hold the human weight, so they could walk down into the land. And especially another thing is that because the straits were so narrow at the time, today there's an ocean current going around the Pacific. So warm water, strong current, Kuroshio Japan current flowing from the south. It's a hot water, warm water. And one of the branch goes around the Kyushu and into the Tsushima Straits and go into Japan Sea. So actually the Japan Sea is a warm sea in terms of the temperature today. But at the time, the straits were so narrow that ocean current would not be able to go in much. And at the same time, there's a constant flow in of the river from the continent, Amur River, famous Amur River and stuff. So supplying the fresh water. And not much supply of the salt water, but a lot of fresh water coming in. This Japan Sea became like almost brackish lake. And salt water is very hard to freeze with a temperature of 0 degree. But if it's becoming a brackish and fresh water, it would freeze in a higher temperature, right? So that also gives me an idea that these straits might have been frozen occasionally, not always, occasionally, in especially cold winter. We have the range of temperature even today. Sometimes the winter is warm, sometimes cold. So they must have had this occasion that they could walk on the ocean. That's my theory. But we don't know yet. I can't prove it. So we have to compare more of the stone tools and other cultural elements of these areas of that time too. But still, we have very less material as you go into the earlier stages. The material volume, the material will be less. So it's very hard to study about the earlier time. But we would do that eventually in the future, of course. And anyway, so we don't know how and when exactly, but people came into Japanese archipelago following the animal. And let's see, it's about 1 hour. Okay, let's have another break. It's 5:40, so let's have another 10 minutes break. Okay. All right. And so, okay. All right. Okay, so the Paleolithic people, hunter and gatherers, wandering around with the animals, following animals, and they came into Japan somehow, sometime. And this is the reduction of a Nauman's elephant. It's a little larger than the normal elephants we see today in the zoo, and have a big tusk. And another sample, this is a bighorn deer, Otsunoshika, Yabe Otsunoshika. The huge monster-like deers, they were in herds, they were wandering around eating grasses. And they had to follow this. And there are evidences from site excavations that they chased these large kinds of animals, not the middle, probably middle kinds, middle size too, but mainly large kinds. And probably it was more efficient, if you catch a big meat and share with the many people. So you can't hunt this kind of huge mammals with a small group, and your kinship group, like your family group, would not be able to big enough to hunt one of those big ones. So probably all the other families got together and cooperate and form a big group and try to catch one of those large-sized mammals. And we see some evidences of that from the sites. I will talk about that later. But so they were after these large mammals. And the environment at the time was glacier period, very cold, and probably it looked like this. This is a reconstruction picture of the scenery at the time. And you would see only conifers, 針葉樹ですね, the sparse forest, very sparse, not the dense forest you could see. And the rest of the land is covered with grass. That's all. It's a very cold, poor looking landscape, isn't it? And people would wear clothes. Of course, it's cold, so you would wear clothes made of animal skin. So they had this sewing technology at that time already. We don't have the evidence from Japan, but there are many evidences from other parts of the world that they had this needle, sewing needle, made of bone, 縫い針ですね. The bone with a perforation at the end, the same form as the sewing needle we use today, but made of bone. So obviously they were working with animal leather and other material to sew the material. They could make clothes, they could make shoes, they could make tents and stuff like that. They were wandering around, so they had to use tents, portable house. They could not make a stable, big house. And they could not carry big and heavy material, heavy tools either. So only material they could carry around is the stone tools and tools that they used for producing tools. You know, those antlers and antler hammers and, you know, other stuffs. So they're moving around, camping. And talking about migration of Homo sapiens, we are the Homo sapiens, of course, most advanced human species in the course of evolution. And the latest theory is that, you know, the Homo sapiens was appeared in Africa, Central Africa, about 100,000 years ago. It's not too long, it's not too old, right? 100,000 years ago, at least. And they started to spread out towards the Eurasian continent, into Europe and Asia. Some went down to the southeast part of the islands and into Australia and Tasmania. And later on, some species went up north and into Japan by about 40,000, 38,000 years ago. And another species, I mean, may not be another species, the same species maybe, but what we call Mongoloids, the Asian species, went farther up and crossed the Beringian Ocean, because at the time, the glacial period, Beringian Ocean is not deep. So it was connected to Northern American continent. So they could walk down into America and walk down all the way down through North and South American continent until they got to the end of it. You know, so within what 90, not 100, but 90,000 years, you know, they traveled all over the world, you know, down to this end. And into the Pacific, it's much later. It's another story. That's my another specialty, Polynesia, but it's later. But anyway, so this is a time the Japanese people, I mean, people came into Japan, either from north through Korean Peninsula, from the south on the boat. We do not know yet. But we have no evidence of ocean crafts. We have no evidence of canoe or rafts or anything all over the world at that time. So we don't know. But there's another evidence that they had to cross the ocean right here in order to go into Australia. So they had, and this is warm area, so they never had this frozen ocean or anything. So they had, obviously they crossed the ocean with some kind of device. But we do not know about that in detail yet. Maybe rafts, not the boat, but the rafts, you know, bundled bamboo or something like that could have been used. But anyway, so that's the story of the immigration into Japan. And yeah, I should have shown this one, you know, the shoreline of 20,000 years ago. You see the straits here and here. It's not connected. And so as the Okinawan Southern Sea islands, you know, they are bigger because of lowering of the ocean, but they are not connected either. So in order to go through it, you have to have a boat. Nowadays, they're insisting that they're finding Paleolithic sites in Okinawa. It was known for many years that they have no Paleolithic sites or evidences in Okinawa, but now they're insisting it. And I doubt it, you know. And those who insist about the existence of Paleolithic people in Okinawa would have to explain about the going across the ocean, you know. So they're adopting the boat canoe theory, but I doubt it for many reasons. You know, nothing is certain yet, except that there's one evidence that they might be part of the Paleolithic people in Okinawa. They're called Minatogawa Man. It was found from not from the cave, but from a how do you call that? It's a limestone cliff and niche. We call them niche, but there's a slit between the cliff. And this guy was found there. Not only this guy, but other bodies, several bodies were found, grown-ups and kids. And compared to the modern man, he's shorter, a little shorter, but he has a strong thigh bone, leg bones, very strong. It's shorter, but very thick, as much as today's bodies, you know. So they had this strong legs, obviously, with a lot of muscle. But they had slender skeletal features in the upper body, very slender upper body, strong legs, represents that they were walkers, you know, they were walking around, moving around. So they had a good legs. And here's reproduction of the Minatogawa Man, you know, slender body, but good legs, you know. And well, we still are not sure about this time period that he belongs to. It's down the cliff, so he must have fallen from the cliff or something and died there. But it's not from the solid sediments of layers, so we can't be for sure he was a Paleolithic man or not. And let's see. But there's no other examples in the Paleolithic skeletal remains in the East Asia. There are some remains found in East Asia, but they don't look like this body features. So we are not too certain about those evidences yet. Anyway, and talking about the life of Paleolithic people, they were campers. They were moving around always. You know, they would get together in a big group and maybe catch one elephant and could survive for what, a month or so, maybe more. And then they had to move to catch another game. You know, I just can't imagine about getting catching elephants and huge deers just by spears. You know? It must be really difficult. They must have had certain device of catching them, but we are not sure. Maybe they must have attacked his legs first to stop their movement. But must be difficult, as you can imagine. It's pretty difficult. And many people died from this hunting activities, obviously. But they had to survive, so, you know, can't help. And we're not too sure about the detail about those hunting activities. This is one example. This is a United States example. In the western part of the States, they have this particular site down below the cliff, high cliff. Here's a river, and there's a cliff right here. And they found a site called Kill Site down below with a lot of bones of buffalo. And it was so many in quantity. So they estimated that they did chasing hunting like this. You know, they chased the herd with a lot of people with using what, smokes or throwing a stone at or something like that. And they chased around and let the herd fall off the cliff, you know, like suiciding, you know, and they could die out below the cliff and they can get the meat or other material. So anyway, even the buffaloes, you know, they have to hire so many people to cooperate for the hunting, right? Okay. And I'm sorry, I'm keep doing this. I should not use this mouse. I should use this one. Okay, and for the stone tools, you know, you can't just use normal stones you can find it easily or around, because you have to have a specific kind of stones, very dense and very hard material that gives a sharp edge when you break it. So you get the sharp blade tool. But the such specific stones cannot be found anywhere. You know, there are limited sources of particular kind of stones, like this obsidian, something like obsidian. Obsidian is a volcanic glass. The quality of the obsidian is almost the same as the glass we use today. So it's very, very sharp when you break it, and gives a very sharp blade edge when you make it into a tool. So they loved it. They used a lot of obsidians, but the obsidian sources are so limited, and you have to go to the source. Sanchi desu ne. You have to go to the source to get those material. But they were wanderers, you know, they were walking around in long distance following animal. So they could do that. occasionally. But they could not stick to one place, the source area, because the animals won't be around all the time, so they have to still follow and move away from the source too. But occasionally they would go into that area just to acquire the stone material. And these maps would show several zones of particular stone qualities. This zone, including Kanto and Chubu, there's a big source of obsidian in Nagano Prefecture, and a little bit in Izu and Kozu Island. And in the northern Japan, this is not obsidian, this is called shale, S-H-A-L-L, shale, no, L-E, shale. Also a very good quality stone that gives a sharp edge. Another obsidian, big obsidian source in Hokkaido, northern island. And this area, people would go up to this source and get the material. And some of those shale sources you can see in black dots. And in the Western Japan, they don't have the obsidian, but they have andesite. It's close to basalt. It's like a lava, but a very fine quality lava. So that they used it, called stone called sanukite. And in the Kyushu area, they have another sources of obsidian, not as good quality as those in Chubu and Hokkaido, but they still have obsidian, so they use that much. So you see the several zoning of the stone quality usage. So the people in that zone would go up to the source and took all the material and use it for a certain time, and they go back again, you see. And let's see, where is it? And there's another case. Recently, they're finding very interesting things in the Paleolithic layer, loam layer, which is trap pits. You don't find it everywhere throughout Japan. It's only in the southern area, like Kanagawa Prefecture, southern Kanto, south from Tokyo, in the coastal area, which is a little warmer than the Tokyo area. And also some of the southern island from Kyushu, south from Kyushu. And not very many examples, but you see this cross section, it's a deep pit. The later soil came in and filled up, but this is obviously intentionally dug out pit. And they are aligned in row like this. So obviously they were intentionally made trap pits for not the elephants. It's too small for elephants, middle-sized animal, I guess. And lately, a couple of years ago, they found another cluster of trap pits. It's a lot of those. And interestingly enough, one group is round, normal pit, but this row shows rectangular square pits. This is a cross section, you see. And this is a half dug. This is a fill. So the entire size shape is a rectangle at the bottom. The top is round, but the bottom is a rectangle. We don't know why they had to dig it in this way. That's a mystery. We have no idea. It takes a lot more effort to make it, angle. Just a round hole is easier to dig, but they made this row. Any particular reasons they must have? We don't know. So we're finding those. This is also in the southern part of the Kanagawa Prefecture. So, and we believed that they could not use the trap pits. It takes a lot of time and effort to make one of those, right? So, but they were wanderers. They had to move around. So they had no time doing this. But some people, some groups did it, you know, because they were aiming at the smaller games, I guess, not the bigger games that constantly moving around, but smaller, middle-sized games like boar, wild boar, and middle-sized deer. They are not the long-distance travelers. They stick to a certain area that they were born. So probably they were aiming at those local animal, middle-sized animal. And the size is good for the middle-sized animal. So no, we don't know yet. It's still a mystery. Very strange thing that they found a couple of years ago. And otherwise, you would not have much plant resources for food, and probably some nuts. Like this is a pine nuts. This is a hazelnuts that we still use today. These two. But you know, pine cones, there's no place to eat. There's no pots to eat. And tiny seeds you may be able to eat, but well, I doubt that, you know, it's very difficult. And a couple species of berries could have been grown in a colder climate, but that would be all plant resources that they could use. So they had to live on the animal flesh. And how about the, wait a minute. Oh, I forgot about important things. The Japanese Paleolithic period starts from 3800, 38,000 years ago, and lasted until the beginning of Jomon period, which is about 15,000 years ago. So about what, more than 20,000 years was a Paleolithic time. But it wasn't the same lifestyle all through. And they had a very big change at the middle. And that's the event, volcanic event that I mentioned about 29,000 years ago. A big eruption of Aira volcano that covered the entire, that ash covered the entire Japan. And so until then, they were big group hunters chasing big animal, large-sized mammals, and they traveled long distance because the animals were moving around for a long distance without any plan. So they had no plan, they just followed the animal. And in the big group. But after the eruption, some of the ash stayed for a long time, many years, in a way up in the atmosphere, not in the atmosphere, but like a Stratocaster outside the atmosphere. Some of the minute particles of the ash would go up there. 細かい火山灰はね、成層圏まで行く。In there, there's no wind blowing. There's no air movement, of course. So they could stay there for many years. And there would be a screen to block the sunlight, sunshine, light and heat from the sun. So that effect gives a lot of effect to the ecological environment, especially the plants. You know, plants would be having a hard time because the temperature lowered, not enough lights, and etc. And the plants decrease was probably obvious, and that also affect the plant-eating, grass-eating mammals and other animal, and human as well. So they had to, that's the time the large mammals started to go extinct. 絶滅に向かったね. And a number of the large mammals were decreasing so rapidly. So they had to change the lifestyle. They were changing lifestyle to, they shifted the game to the smaller animal, like middle-sized ones, you know. And after that, they didn't move around too much long distance because, as I mentioned, those middle-sized animals stayed in one place, one area. But of course, you can't, human beings cannot stay in the same area forever because you hunt the animal and there will be no animal in that area. So you eventually you have to move around, but not as much as the former half of the period. So in the short scale movement, and also they could have been chosen certain area like A, B, C, D, and they would go around that same spots again and again. They would have certain plan compared to the previous ones. They would have certain plan to go around the area. In Japanese, that movement is called shukai, going around, instead of just wandering around. Yudo, the Zenhan. So the lifestyle changed, and that's represented by the stone tool types. In the former type, former period, the stone tools of the entire Japan were all alike, very close in style. But in the latter half, they show locality, certain locality, and they show differences between certain areas. That means they had this long distance travel, means they had so much communication all throughout the land. You know, at the time, it's obvious that they had language, and they have a special feature in their skull that they could use the tongue very freely compared to the earlier human beings. So obviously they had languages to express various phonetic values. And I'm pretty sure they had a sort of common language throughout the land. They were originally the same group spread around and to the various area of the island. So they must have had a basic language that they could share. And those long distance travelers meet each other occasionally, some places, you know, and exchange information, exchange material, food, whatever, and exchange people. You know, they have to exchange people, the marriage, you know, the brides and man and woman, you have to exchange and mix the blood. You can't just keep the same kinship relations, and unless you will get the DNA trouble, right? They must have known that from the early period. So they exchanged so many things, material, information, people, etc. At the occasion, but they had no plan of moving. So it was by chance. It's coincidence that they meet each other. So they could not plan, but they could not miss the chance. So they did take advantage of this meeting, of course. But in the latter half of the period, you know, the movement was shorter, in a smaller range. So they could not meet with the distant people, distant groups. So eventually they would form a different tradition of stone tool technology. So the original technology would be developed in each area and make differences in later time. And that's being observed from the excavated material. So obviously, in the latter half of the Paleolithic period, they were in the different lifestyle compared to the former one. All right. But acquiring the good stone like obsidians in the latter half of that period, some of the group would not be able to approach the source. In that case, they could exchange the material, stone material, with the other group too. I'm sure they had more chances of meeting with other groups, encounter with other groups in the latter half of the period. I will show you now. Like in the latter half, you would have maybe, well, okay, A, B, C, D, 4 areas. We are going around by season or by certain period. You're going around. This is one group. Alpha, beta. They may be going around too, like a E, G. But they would go to this area too. So there must be an overlap of 2 groups. You know, that's quite possible, right? Another group too, going around, including D. You know, so that's the chance, and it's more possible to meet with other group compared to the earlier non-planned movement. So you can expect to see other group if you're sure to go around the same route. And if another group is doing the same thing, then if you go to this D point in a certain season, maybe they would come again too. So you can expect and you can plan out to some extent. So in that sense, you would be able to expect of exchanging material and other stuffs. If they are closer to the source of the stone, you know, they could get the stone and they could carry around and exchange to this other group, you see? So it's a quite different system compared to the earlier ones. A lot of possibilities still, but it's more planned activities. Okay. All right. Yeah, I forgot about this one. And subsistence, yeah. And also, I mentioned about the evidences from the excavations. In the earlier half, we were finding a huge site, Paleolithic huge sites, like a 50, 60, 80 meters across, huge ones, and full of scatter of stone material, stone fragments. Obviously, they were making stone tools right there. So they left the debris right there, but they were spread all around and clearly showing that they had this big group activities. You know, they were living with a group. But in later time, we never find this kind of huge site in the Paleolithic time. We find a lot of debris and remnant of stone tool production, but they are small, always small size. So obviously the big group activity was banned in the former half because they gave up hunting large mammals. They were going extinct. So they shifted the game to a smaller animal, and they didn't have to move around with a big group if you're aiming at the smaller animal, right? So that's the difference that you can see from the excavation of the Paleolithic loam layers. All right, and how about the houses? They never built a real house, but probably portable tents. They were camping, so tentatively camping, so they needed portable tents. And there's no evidence of actual tents. You know, they were made of wood frame and wood column and what? Well, I shouldn't say column. It's a beam-like thing. Straight wood, several straight wood, and covered with animal leather or hide or fur or whatever. So that's a simple thing. And what we normally find, especially in the Eurasian continent, this is a Siberian, one of the middle part of the Siberian, Malita site in Russia. And they're finding this block of stone, alignment of stones, and full of animal bones and antlers, debris. And probably this could have been the remain of a tent, their houses. And some reconstruction pictures like this, you know, it's like a Indian teepees, very simple tent. Another picture is like this. And the house, the tent will be covered with animal leather or skin, but you know, you have to close up the bottom. And you know, if you have a wind blowing, you know, it will flap and it will have a cold air coming in. So they probably use stones to stabilize the base of the tent. And so they are finding this cluster of stones only from the sites. And probably that's the site on a tent site, isn't it? Probably they use the tent, they put up tent like this. And that's why, because that's the reason why they're finding cluster of stones in square from this site. And they also find the debris of stone fragments. Stone tool making was practiced right by the tent. That's understandable. But we do not know the reality about these tentative house tents, except for this one. This is a very peculiar, very rare thing. This is the only case in Siberia. They use mammoth bones and tusks. And it's a big house. And huge bones you can see of the mammoths, elephants. And this is a head bone skull of the elephants with the engravings with the red paints inside. And this is so different, you know. You can't think of the Paleolithic lifestyle from this because they were moving around. They were hunter and gatherer and chasing mammoth in Siberia. So they could not stay here forever, but they built this. So probably this house is very specific for them. And this was the headquarters. And they would go out chasing around animal, but eventually they would come back to this place and go out to the other place, you know, something like that. So they needed to have a stabilized, very solid house. You know, this is so rare. You never find it in other parts of the world. There are some cases like this. This is jaw bones, a lot of jaw bones stacked, you know, of the elephants. It's really strange. Another mystery too. And in Japan, we do not have much evidences of the house or tents. There is, in the later Paleolithic period, it's a very small, slight depression of the land in circle. They didn't excavate this half, so it's only half they could excavate, but it's a very shallow depression here, shallow pit, and small pits or alignment along the sides. And this could have been the remain of the tent too. We do not know. This is another case in Kanagawa Prefecture. But this is very in large size, you know, this is 2-meter scale. So it's over 6-7 meter in diameter. And you find big pits in circle and small stones scattered around. Too small and too few for weights, but we don't know. And at the center, you have 2 pits with charcoal inside. So probably these are the fireplaces. But this size is too big. If they put up the pillars and posts round and make tents, it's a huge tent. It's also almost impossible to make it and maintain it and live in. You know, the tents, basically the tents of the Paleolithic time is just a tentative shelter. You can spend night there, and you know, you can avoid rainwater or something like that. That's all. Basically, there were activities mostly outside, and so we don't really know if this was the remain of the house either. And you know, it's a tent. You don't leave anything, you know, any activity remain as a tent. So it's very hard to find from site excavation. And this is the earlier case that I mentioned, the earlier half when they hunted for elephants and stuff. This site is big. This is over 30 meter in diameter. And these tiny white things are the debris of stone tool making. You know, all the flakes and chips scattered around, and they just left it. They just left it as it is. So there must have been a lot of people sitting all around in circle and making stone tools all together at one time. And probably this is a reconstruction of the tents scattered around this working area for many families. It's a big group. It could be a base camp too. They made stone tools and get ready for hunting and go out chasing animals and come back. We don't know. And there's another example, another sites in Gunma Prefecture. So also the big one. This is a 10 meter scale, so it's over 30 meter in diameter. And you see units of a concentration of artifacts. And these are all remain of stone tool making. And they are always in circle somehow, and some in the central area. And it's really interesting to see when you make a detailed study about those fragments, and when you do the fitting that I mentioned last week, and try to reproduce the original stone, and some of them would fit together. Of course, they were originally from one stone. They flaked the pieces out and scattered so they could make it, reproduce it again to the original state. And in some cases, some of these fragments and these fragments would fit. Some of these and these fit together, you know, even though they're in separate, they're remote area, they fit together. So that means these two people were sharing the original material, you know, and that kind of activities could have been reproduced from these evidences of artifact distribution. If you make a very, very close study, you could tell that kind of things too. You can tell the movement of human beings in this. And this is a reconstruction picture of that time. They were in circle, and so many tents and big groups. And some people were cutting meat, the games, some people making stone tools. Some guys are hunting, trying to go out hunting, smaller ones, I guess. in a very cold climate. Okay, and timing is, let's see, how much I should go. Where will we? More pictures. Okay, all right. In some cases, not very many, but in some cases, they would not use the tent, but they use the shelter, natural shelter, not the cave, not to be a cave, but there are so many shelters at the foot of a mountain and hill, and that they could stay overnight or stay for several certain time. And if it's a cave, you can't live inside the cave, really deep into the cave, because you can't build fire. You will be smoked out yourself. So the shelter, it was good for them to survive. And there are some cases of that, and shelter sites have been excavated too to find the Paleolithic stuffs. Okay, talking about the food, the meat, when they get the meat, cut them out and eat, how they ate the meat. You know, I don't believe that they ate the meat raw. Raw meat is dangerous. A lot of germs and pesticides and what, you know, a lot of things living in there that would harm your health and that could kill you sometimes. So they must have known that. So I'm pretty sure that human beings of the Homo sapiens stage, they never ate raw meat, but they always cooked, heat the meat before eating. And there are so much evidences of heating and cooking the meat in Japanese Paleolithic layers, and which is called stone cluster. This is like a frying pan. And it's pebble-sized stones, round stones, all collected and gathered in a circle form. And many of those bear color, lighter color, red color. You can't really see it here, but the yellowish color. And those stones, normally the local stones like sandstones and dirt and other things, that normally doesn't show color. It's always gray or black or whitish. But they contain some portion of iron. So when they were heated, the iron was oxidized and showed the reddish color. It's like a rust of the iron nail. So those colored stone obviously represents the heating activities over it. And some bears black soot or charred material. 焦げですね、お焦げ。すすですね。Soot or charred material bearing. So obviously they were cooking or baking something over it. And what they probably did was build fire over it and heat the stone once and quench the fire and grill the meat over the heated stone like a frying pan, you know. And the reason why we believe that is that if you use the bare fire to cook, if you expose the meat over the fire, the fire is too hot and it will give charcoal right away on the surface of the meat. And it's not edible when it's charred. 焦げたら食えない。See? And, but the inside is still raw. You know, the fire gives direct heat, but it reflects on the surface of the material. So the surface is bad, but inside is raw. It's not edible at all. So they found out, they invented this device of stone cooking. And if you heat up the stones and quench the fire, cease the fire, and use this heated stone, the temperature of the heated stone is not as hot as the bare fire, right? So it would not char, it will not give a black surface on the meat so easily. But another characteristics of the stone is the far infrared ray. I think I explained that in the Yuasa Museum in the first lecture. They would radiate the far infrared ray. 遠赤外線ですね。熱すると石は遠赤外線を出す。And that's the heat that penetrates the material, penetrates the meat. So the surface will be safe and inside will be well cooked if you cook the meat over the stone, heated stone. So this is what we call stone cluster, the cooking facility of the Paleolithic people. Normally, when we excavate the Paleolithic sites, it's not in this state. It's really intact. It looks as if they were still using it, you know, when they left it. But normally what we find is the remnant. They pulled out the broken pieces, and, you know, they're all scattered all around, and, you know, it's in the miserable state. And still we can tell that it was a cooking facility, but this was several years ago. I found it in one of the sites. It's very intact, and it's a rare case. And they obviously they were planning to use it again, so they left it like this and moved out, or for some reasons they left it like this, you know. So that's one of the inventions they did for better survival on meat diet, you see. All right. Okay, it's right time. I should stop. You must be tired too. Okay, let's continue next week from this on. All right, any questions so far? No? Maybe you're too tired. Oh, well, of course, you can ask questions and give comments to the comment sheet afterwards. Please write comments, or otherwise you will lose points, grading points. And any question, any comments are welcome. And if you are not watching this now, and if you, I'm gonna put this up to YouTube, and if you're gonna see it later, and if you're not in time for a comment sheet, then you can send me a direct mail, writing comments and questions later, okay? And that should be a point too. Any other question? Surviving? Sleeping? I don't know. Okay, all right. Okay, then I will see you again next week. I will show you more stuffs later. Big snake, poison snake. All right. Okay, bye-bye.